The world is rooted, literally. As a hero among the remnants of humanity, it's time to bust out the pruning shears and a gun or two to blast the invading interdimensional tree beasts back into the ground. Remnant from the Ashes is a third-person action shooter from Darksiders 3 developer Gunfire Games. Just like the game's antagonist, it seemed to have sprung up out of nowhere, and coming in cold, I was totally baffled by what kind of game this was, when and where it was set, even the genre. Medieval? Wait, I'm in a warehouse? Is that magic? Oh, there are guns! Cool. It's certainly a pastiche of a game, and in the first few hours you'll get whiffs of Resident Evil, Destiny, Gears of War, and most obviously the Soulsborne games. Of course, every third-person action game these days needs a bunch of Souls mechanics, and here it's present in the redstone shrines which act as bonfires, the respawning enemies, and in the fog-gated boss rooms. It's rounded out by the classic RPG-light elements with simple character, weapon, and armor upgrades.
Every little bit counts out there.
However, the design element that the game really sells itself on is the procedural generation of the enemies, characters, and items which fill the world. From boss fights to NPC interactions and more. With the campaign lasting around 15 hours, it'll take 3 or so playthroughs to encounter everything the game has to offer.
You're welcome back anytime.
Combat is honestly nothing special, but it's chunky and it flows nicely between melee and ranged fighting. If you're not trying to conserve ammo, encounters usually start with a few ranged pickoffs, then switch to close encounters melee spamming. One feature I do really like is that there's no lock-on function. Of course, this would make the shooting entirely unenjoyable, but in melee it means you need to manually target your strokes by swinging your character towards the enemies. It adds a bit of skill to the spam and feels cool.
He's down!
The game does tell you to watch your stamina, but it regenerates so quickly that I've barely bothered upgrading it and have never been caught out of breath. Except that time I caught root rot.
Tell Tiny Tim I won't be coming home this Christmas.
While you do pick a class of fighter right at the start, nothing is actually bound to that archetype. You can equip whatever weapon and gear you find or purchase along the way, and start to build a playstyle around them, particularly once you've started augmenting them. Weapon mods are a clever little feature that can be activated after you've fought enough baddies with that weapon to charge them up. Their effects have a limited duration and range from incendiary rounds to things like damage resistant buffs. The enemy design is varied and beautiful. Even after a few hours of fighting the same looking fodder, the game does find new ways to throw them at you, keeping you on your toes. Thanks to the procedural design, each gauntlet between checkpoints spawns random enemy captains, stronger foes with unique or just straight up brutal attacks. This makes each attempt at a zone interesting, as you can't be certain what's around the next corner, or behind you. There's a bit of a Halo vibe too in the way that bullets and thrown projectiles are slow enough to see coming and dodge, and how enemies do some clever dodging of their own. With a nice mix of different enemies on the board, things can become frantic and very, very deadly. Your health pots, in this case a dragon heart, has limited charges, but each use gets you back to maximum health. This makes for a fun risk-reward meta as you hold off chugging one down until you absolutely need it. The game is challenging by design, and you will die, but it's far less punishing than you might expect. And if you're lucky, the barky bastard that killed you might not even be around on your next run through that area. The world design itself is artistically engaging, with luminescent red cutting through a bleakness of a devastated land. It's all reminiscent of that early noughties brown era of games. But the early level design, well, that's reminiscent of the 90s. Everything is super linear, with early stages set in claustrophobic underground passages. You'll be walking through subway tunnels and sewers before heading back to your underground bunker to mindlessly run between cliched narrative beats.
First, we need power.
You go upstairs and start the reactor. That should do it.
Glad to see you got the reactor running.
Sure is good to have some light around here.
Thanks for getting the power back on.
Despite that enjoyable combat, this funnel design early on in the game feels very limited and becomes tiresome. Fortunately, later zones do show promise of a bit more diversity in colour and just a little less brown. Cooperative play is drop in, drop out, and adds an element of chaos to the fun as your idiot teammate triggers boss fights that you're totally not prepared for. The game allows up to 3 players to run gauntlets together against enemies with more health and greater damage output, and it seems to balance itself well enough to meet your extra munitions and still stay challenging. For those who care, there is a distinct lack of AAA polish in areas. Moments of bugged physics, some dodgy camera, and weird death screen quotes from Shakespeare and Nietzsche and their ilk. Why? I don't completely know.
I know this has all been a bit rough for you.
But despite being rough around the edges, there's plenty of great little touches which show a lot of love that was put in here by the devs. Remnant from the Ashes is an impressive game. Although a single playthrough is going to satisfy many, the vast replayability is going to make this such a good value for money purchase for anyone willing to invest the time to see all of the content. And on a personal note, I've never actually been much of a green thumb, so it's nice to finally have a game that lets me vent my rage against stupid plants.